The air tasted like copper and regret. 34 degrees Celsius at midnight, and Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez could feel the humidity pressing against her lungs like a wet cloth wrapped around her face. The jungle canopy above Point Celine's airport had become a cathedral of shadows, each leaf dripping condensation that landed on her neck with the regularity of a dying man's heartbeat. Through her rifle scope, she counted 17 heartbeats between each drop. 17. The same number of confirmed kills she needed to graduate from rookie. To operator in Captain Holloway's eyes, behind her, approximately 12 meters to the northeast, Captain Marcus Jester Holloway lay prone in a depression of volcanic soil, his graying hair plastered to his forehead with sweat that refused to evaporate. His left eye, the one with the slight strabismo from that explosion in the Mekong Delta 11 years ago, witched involuntarily as he scanned the perimeter. Through his night vision binoculars, the green-tinged world revealed shapes that shouldn't exist. A mansion without doors, rising from the jungle floor, its windows black as pitch, its architecture impossibly Victorian in a Caribbean war zone. Elena blinked. The mansion was gone. In its place, the T-55 Cuban tank designated El Demonio crawled through the underbrush like a prehistoric predator, its engine emitting that distinctive guttural sound, half mechanical failure, half animal growl that had earned it its name among the local population. 23 kill marks adorned its hull, each one a promise of American blood yet to be spilled. The tank's commander, Colonel Raul Menendez, stood in the open hatch, his face illuminated by the glow of his cigarette. From this distance, Elena could see the scar tissue that covered the left side of his jaw burns from a training accident in Angola that had only made him more dangerous, more determined, more willing to become the monster his enemies feared. She steadied her breathing. One shot, one kill, one extraction, but something was wrong with her hands. They trembled. Not the micro-tremors of adrenaline that every sniper learns to channel, but the paralytic shaking of genuine terror, the kind that had plagued her since childhood. Since that night in Miami, when the news arrived that her father's fishing boat had been intercepted by Cuban patrol vessels. Since the moment her grandmother's heart stopped beating while waiting for news that never came. "Sombra, you have the shot." Holloway's voice crackled in her earpiece, using her call sign with an intimacy that suggested both respect and concern. Elena's finger hovered over the trigger of her M21, the rifle she had nicknamed Esperanza, hope in a moment of sentimentality she now regretted. Hope was a luxury in war. Hope was the thing that got soldiers killed. Through her scope, she watched Menendez laugh at something one of his crew members said. The sound carried across the jungle, distorted by distance and humidity, into something that resembled the cry of a wounded animal. Or perhaps it was an animal. Perhaps it was both. A figure appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision, an old woman in a white dress, her face partially obscured by shadows, her hand raised in a gesture that could have been warning or blessing. The woman looked exactly like the photograph Elena carried in her vest pocket, her grandmother, Ana Maria Vasquez, who had died 3 years ago in a small apartment in Little Havana, still praying for the return of a son who would never come home. "Abuela," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure pointed toward the tank, then toward a path through the jungle that Elena hadn't noticed before, a narrow corridor of slightly less dense vegetation that led around the tank's position rather than through it. "Sombra, I repeat, do you have the shot?" Holloway's voice was sharper now, edged with the particular urgency of a man who had lost soldiers before and refused to lose another. Elena pulled her eye from the scope long enough to look at where the old woman had stood. Nothing. Just jungle, shadows, and the oppressive heat of a Caribbean night that seemed determined to suffocate everything in its embrace. Was she losing her mind? Or had she seen something that transcended the boundaries of rational explanation? The question burned in her consciousness as she returned her attention to the scope, to the target, to the mission that would define her career and possibly end it. Affirmative, she lied. "I have the shot." But her hands still trembled, and somewhere in the darkness, something that might have been her grandmother or might have been madness, waited with the patience of the dead. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Ambrose Red Moon, the mission briefing had taken place 14 hours earlier, in the cramped interior of a C-130 transport aircraft, somewhere over the Caribbean Sea. Eleanor remembered the smell of aviation fuel and nervous sweat, the way the overhead lights had flickered with each pocket of turbulence, casting shadows across the faces of her fellow soldiers. That made them look like strangers or corpses. Major Harrison, the mission commander, had spoken in the clipped, efficient tones of a man who had delivered too many briefings that ended in body bags. Operation Urgent Fury. The liberation of Grenada from its Marxist-Leninist government. The rescue of American medical students trapped on the island. The elimination of Cuban military advisors who had transformed a Caribbean paradise into a Soviet satellite. But for Elena, the mission had always been something more personal. Her father, Miguel Vasquez, had fled Cuba in 1960 to during the chaos following the Bay of Pigs invasion. He had built a life in America, raised a family, operated a commercial fishing vessel out of Miami. And then, in 1979, his boat had strayed too close to Cuban territorial waters during a storm, and he had simply disappeared. The Cuban government denied any knowledge of his fate. The American government expressed concern but took no action. And Ana Maria Vasquez had spent the remaining years of her life sitting by the window of her apartment, watching the sea, waiting for a son who would never return. Elena had been 19 when her grandmother died. She had enlisted in the army the following week. Now, at 22, she lay in the volcanic soil of Grenada, approximately 300 meters from a Cuban tank commander who represented everything she had been trained to destroy. The mathematics of her hatred were simple. If she couldn't rescue her father, she could at least eliminate the regime that had taken him. But mathematics rarely account for trembling hands. "You're thinking too much." The voice came from her left, startling her so completely that she nearly squeezed the trigger. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see Holloway, but instead found a young soldier she didn't recognize, crouched beside her in combat fatigues that seemed wrong somehow, the pattern slightly off, the colors faded as if by decades of exposure to sun and rain. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, her finger moving from the trigger to the safety, then back again. The soldier smiled a warm expression that seemed wildly inappropriate given their circumstances. "Call me consejero. I'm here to help." Consejero, the Spanish word for advisor or counselor. Elena's mind raced through possibilities: an infiltrator, a hallucination, a symptom of the heat exhaustion that had been building in her system for hours. "I don't know. You're not part of my unit." "Does that matter?" Consejero asked, his voice carrying a strange echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "What matters is that you're about to take a shot you're not ready to take. What matters is that your hands are shaking because your mind is somewhere else, somewhere in the past, somewhere in a Miami apartment with an old woman who's been dead for 3 years. Elena's blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" "I know a lot of things, Elena. I know that you've been seeing your grandmother ever since you landed on this island. I know that you think you're going crazy. And I know that the shot you're about to take will determine whether you live or die tonight. Sombra, status report." Holloway's voice cut through the conversation, demanding attention. Elena keyed her radio. "Standby. Minor complication. Negative. We don't have time for complications. El Demonio is moving into position to block the extraction route. You have 60 seconds to take the shot, or we abort." Elena looked back at Consejero, but the space where he had been crouching was empty. Just volcanic soil and shadows and the distant rumble of the tank's engine. Had she imagined him? Had the stress finally cracked something fundamental in her psyche? She returned her attention to the scope, forcing her breathing into the 4-count rhythm she had learned in sniper school. For seconds in, for seconds hold, for seconds out, for seconds hold. Her heartbeat slowed. Her hand steadied slightly. Through the scope, Colonel Menendez was climbing back into the tank, preparing to move. In 30 seconds, he would be behind armor plating. In 60 seconds, he would be out of range. In 90 seconds, the extraction route would be blocked, and Elena and Holloway would be trapped in enemy territory with no way out. She made her decision. "Taking the shot," she said, and squeezed the trigger. The M21 bucked against her shoulder with familiar violence. The round traveled at 800 meters per second, covering the distance to the target in less than half a second. Elena watched through the scope as the bullet traced its arc toward Menendez's head, as time seemed to slow to a crawl, as everything she had trained for came down to this single moment of ballistic precision. And then something impossible happened. The bullet stopped, not metaphorically, not in her perception, but actually stopped suspended in midair approximately 2 meters from Menendez's skull, hovering like a hummingbird frozen in flight. The colonel continued his descent into the tank, oblivious to the projectile that should have ended his life. Elena blinked and the bullet was gone. Menendez was inside the tank, the hatch closing behind him. Shot missed, she reported, her voice flat, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Target is inside the vehicle. Missed? Holloway's voice dripped with disbelief. You're telling me our best sniper missed a stationary target at 300 meters? Affirmative. Rifle malfunction. The round must have. She stopped herself, realizing how absurd any explanation would sound. Sir, we need to move. The extraction route is compromised. A long pause. Then, Roger that. Sombra. Rally point Bravo. We'll figure out another way. Elena pulled back from her position, collapsing the bipod on her rifle with movements that felt mechanical, disconnected from conscious thought. As she turned to move toward Holloway's position, she saw Consejero again standing at the edge of a small clearing, his form partially transparent in the moonlight. The bullet didn't malfunction, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. You did. Your grandmother showed you the other path for a reason. Sometimes the shot you don't take is more important than the shot you do. You're not real, Elena whispered. Consejero smiled sadly. Neither is the line between sanity and survival. Keep moving, Elena. The night is young. You have much further to fall before you can begin to rise. Then he was gone, and Elena was alone with her rifle, her doubts, and the growing certainty that this mission would end in ways none of them had anticipated. In war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. Napoleon Bonaparte Captain Marcus Holloway had survived 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 divorces, 1 exploding helicopter, and approximately 47 lectures from superior officers about his inappropriate use of humor in combat situations. He had earned every gray hair on his head, every line on his face, every nightmare that still woke him at 03:00 hours with the taste of napalm in his mouth. But he had never seen a soldier quite like Elena Vasquez. As they moved through the jungle toward Rally Point Bravo, maintaining a tactical spacing of 5 meters, Holloway watched his young sniper with the critical eye of a man who had trained dozens of operators over his career. Her movements were textbook perfect, careful foot placement, controlled breathing, constant sector scanning. But there was something off about her eyes, something distant, something that reminded him of soldiers who had been in the field too long. You want to tell me what really happened back there? He asked during a brief halt, keeping his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their immediate position. Elena didn't meet his gaze. I told you. Rifle malfunction. Bullshit. Holloway moved closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on her forehead, the slight tremor in her jaw. I've been watching you since we hit the ground. You're seeing things that aren't there. You're talking to yourself. And you just missed the easiest shot of your career. With respect, sir, don't with respect me, Vasquez. I've been shot at by better soldiers than you, and I've buried worse. What I need to know is whether you're going to get us both killed before we make extraction. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. The jungle pressed in around them, a living wall of vegetation that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. In the distance, the rumble of El Demonio's engine grew louder, then softer, then louder again, as if the tank were circling their position like a shark scenting blood. Finally, Elena spoke. My grandmother died 3 years ago. She raised me after my father disappeared. She used to tell me stories about Cuba before Castro, about the house she grew up in, about the family she left behind. She believed in things, spirits, signs, messages from the dead. I always thought it was superstition. Holloway remained silent, letting her continue. But ever since we landed on this island, I've been seeing her. Not dreams, not memories. I see her standing in the jungle, pointing at things, trying to tell me something. And there's someone else, a soldier, I think, but not from our unit. He calls himself Consejero. He talks to me about the mission, about my life, about things he shouldn't know. She finally met Holloway's eyes, and he saw in them something he recognized from his own mirror, the desperate hope that someone would understand, paired with the certainty that no one could. I know how this sounds, Elena continued. I know you probably think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I swear to you, sir, what I see feels more real than anything else on this island. And right before I took that shot, my grandmother showed me another path, a way around the tank that I hadn't noticed before. Holloway considered this for a long moment. In Vietnam, he had known soldiers who talked to the dead. Some of them had been genuinely insane. Others had simply found a coping mechanism that worked for them. and a very few had demonstrated an inexplicable ability to survive situations that should have killed them. "The way around the tank," he said finally. "Can you find it again?" Elena blinked, clearly surprised by the question. I think so. Yes. "Then show me." Holloway checked his ammunition, adjusted the straps on his vest, and prepared to move. "I don't know what you're seeing, Vasquez, and I don't particularly care. What I care about is getting both of us off this island alive. If your dead grandmother wants to help with that, she's welcome to join the team." He patted the Karenni around his neck, the one holding his 3 wedding rings, and managed a grim smile. "Lord knows I've had worse partners." Elena stared at him for a moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she nodded and began moving through the jungle, following a path that only she could see. And Holloway followed because in 23 years of military service, he had learned one incontrovertible truth. Sometimes the craziest soldiers were the only ones who made it home. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu, the path Eleanor's grandmother had shown her, wound through the jungle like a serpent, twisting and doubling back on itself in ways that defied conventional navigation. Several times, Holloway was certain they had walked in circles. Several times. He opened his mouth to voice his concerns, only to find that the next turn revealed terrain they hadn't seen before. The heat refused to relent. 36 degrees now, if Holloway's decades of experience in tropical warfare were any judge. His uniform was soaked through, his boots squelching with each step, his muscles burning with the particular fatigue of moving tactically through hostile territory. But Elena moved with increasing confidence, her earlier hesitation replaced by a fluid certainty that seemed almost supernatural. They had been moving for approximately 40 minutes when they encountered the door. It stood in a small clearing, completely alone, connected to nothing, a wooden door frame supporting an ornate mahogany door, the kind that might grace the entrance to a wealthy colonial estate. The wood was carved with intricate patterns of tropical flowers and birds, the brass handle polished to a mirror shine despite the humidity. "What the hell?" Holloway muttered, raising his weapon. Elena approached the door slowly, her rifle lowered in a way that suggested she had seen stranger things tonight. "Consejero told me there would be tests, passages that lead to walls, structures that shouldn't exist. The war doesn't just happen in the physical world, sir. It happens in the mind." "That's very philosophical, Vasquez. But it doesn't explain why there's a goddamn door in the middle of the jungle." "No," Elena agreed. "It doesn't." She reached for the handle, and Holloway found himself tensing, half expecting an explosion, a trap, an ambush. Instead, the door opened smoothly, revealing darkness. Not the darkness of nighttime jungle, which was never truly complete, always broken by moonlight, starlight, the phosphorescent glow of tropical fungi. This was absolute darkness, the kind that swallowed light rather than merely existing in its absence. "I think we're supposed to go through," Elena said. "Like hell we are. Sir, with respect, this is the path. I know it sounds insane, but my grandmother is showing me the way. This door leads to the other side of the Cuban perimeter. If we take it, we avoid El Demonio entirely." Holloway stared at the darkness, then at Elena, then back at the darkness. His rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that doors didn't appear in jungles, that stepping into void blackness was suicide. But his gut, the same gut that had told him to drop flat 3 seconds before that helicopter exploded in case, and told him something different. "If we die in there," he said, "I'm haunting you for the rest of eternity." "Fair enough, sir." Holloway took a deep breath, checked his weapon one final time, and stepped through the door. The darkness swallowed him completely. For a moment, it could have been a second or an hour, there was nothing. No sight, no sound, no sensation of the ground beneath his feet, just void and silence, and a strange certainty that he was being examined by something vast and ancient, and fundamentally indifferent to human concerns. Then light returned, and Holloway found himself standing on the other side of the Cuban defensive line. The jungle here was different, denser, older, with trees that seemed to lean inward like curious spectators. Behind him, there was no door, no clearing, nothing but impenetrable vegetation. Elena emerged beside him a moment later, blinking in the moonlight. "Did that really just happen?" she asked. "I have no idea," Holloway replied, "and I'm never putting it in a report." They checked their surroundings, established their bearings, and began moving toward Rally Point Bravo with renewed urgency. The extraction point was less than 2 kilometers away now. But they both understood that the night was far from over. Somewhere behind them, the engine of El Demonio roared to life, as if the tank had suddenly realized its prey had escaped. The hunt was still on. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Charles Darwin, often quoted in military contexts, Rally Point Bravo was a bombed-out sugarcane processing facility on the edge of what had once been a productive agricultural zone. The Cubans had used it as the supply depot during the first hours of the American invasion. The Americans had responded with an airstrike that had reduced most of the buildings to rubble and ash. Now it served as a rendezvous point for scattered American forces, a temporary refuge in a landscape of chaos and violence. Elena and Holloway arrived at Odu for 7 hours, having covered the final kilometer in a state of hypervigilance that left them both exhausted and wired. The facility was occupied by a small squad of Army Rangers who had fought their way out of an ambush near the medical school campus. Their leader, a young lieutenant named Parker, greeted Holloway with the particular relief of a junior officer who desperately needed guidance. "Captain, thank God. We've been trying to raise command for the past hour, but our comms are being jammed. The Cubans have established a blocking position on the main road, and we've got wounded who need evac ASAP." Holloway assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a veteran. 6 Rangers, 2 of them wounded, one with a bullet through the shoulder, the other with shrapnel in his leg, limited ammunition, no anti-armor capability, and somewhere out there, El Demonio was still hunting. "What's the status on enemy forces?" he asked. "We've counted at least 30 Cuban regulars in the immediate area, plus that tank. They're sweeping the perimeter in a grid pattern. It's like they know we're here." "They probably do." Holloway turned to Elena, who was checking her rifle with the focused intensity of someone trying very hard not to think about what she had experienced in the past few hours. "Vasquez, I need you on overwatch. Find a position with good sight lines and let me know what you see." Elena nodded and moved off, scaling a partially collapsed wall to reach an elevated position that commanded a view of the surrounding terrain. As she settled into her sniper's crouch, she felt a familiar presence beside her. "You did well." Consejero was there again, crouched next to her like a shadow given form. The door was a test. Not everyone can see it, and not everyone who sees it has the courage to pass through. "I'm not interested in tests," Elena replied, keeping her voice low enough that the Rangers below couldn't hear. "I'm interested in getting these people to safety. Those things are not mutually exclusive." Consejero pointed toward the eastern tree line. "Your enemy is there. The tank will arrive in approximately 12 minutes. And the choice you make in the next hour will determine not only your fate, but the fate of everyone in this compound." What choice? But Consejero was already fading, his form becoming transparent, then ghostly, then nothing at all. In his place, Elena saw her grandmother standing at the far end of the compound, near a doorway that led into what remained of the processing facility's main building. The old woman was pointing at something Elena couldn't see. Through her scope, Elena scanned the eastern tree line and confirmed what Consejero had told her: Cuban soldiers, moving through the underbrush, preparing to assault the compound. She counted 15, then 20, then lost track as they disappeared into patches of shadow. She keyed her radio. "Captain, we've got company. Eastern approach, 20-plus hostiles, approximately 800 meters out. They're massing for an assault." Holloway's voice came back immediately. "Copy that. Any sign of the tank?" As if in answer, the distinctive growl of El Demonio's engine echoed through the night, growing louder with each passing second. "Affirmative. Sounds like it's coming from the northeast." A long pause. Then, "Vasquez, I need you to buy us time. Can you delay their assault?" Elena considered her ammunition, 37 rounds, plus the pistol on her hip. Against 20-plus soldiers in a tank, it was barely enough to make a difference. But barely enough was sometimes all that mattered. "I can try, sir. That's all I'm asking. We'll work on a plan for the tank. Just keep those foot soldiers off our back." "Roger that." Elena steadied her breathing, found her first targeted Cuban sergeant directing his men from behind a fallen tree, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the night, and a man died. "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion." Alexander the Great, the battle for Rally Point Bravo lasted 43 minutes. In military terms, this was an eternity. 43 minutes of continuous combat, of muzzle flashes and screaming men and the acrid smell of curdite mixing. with the ever-present humidity of the Caribbean night. Elena fired 29 of her 37 rounds, each one finding its mark with a precision that seemed almost supernatural, as if her grandmother's ghost was guiding her hands. She killed 11 men that night, 11 fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, 11 human beings who had believed in something strongly enough to travel across the ocean and fight for it. Elena felt each death like a weight on her soul, a burden she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. But she also saved lives. Each Cuban soldier who fell was one fewer rifle pointed at Lieutenant Parker's wounded men, one fewer threat to the mission, one fewer obstacle between her and the eventual rescue of the American medical students. The mathematics of war were simple, but their simplicity concealed infinite complexities. Through it all, Holloway directed the defense with the calm efficiency of a man who had seen worse and survived. He positioned the Rangers to create overlapping fields of fire, organized the wounded for potential evacuation, and maintain constant communication with Elena, adjusting their tactics based on her observations. "Tank is circling the western perimeter," she reported during a brief lull. "Looks like they're trying to find a firing position. Can you take out the commander?" "Negative. He's staying buttoned up. Learned his lesson from before." "All right. We'll have to do this the hard way." The hard way turned out to be a desperate gambit involving 3 Rangers to thermite grenades and a suicidal charge across open ground. Elena provided covering fire as Holloway led the assault, her scope tracking targets with the mechanical precision of a woman who had stopped thinking and started acting purely on instinct. She watched through her scope as Holloway reached the tank's blind spot, as he scaled the hull with surprising agility for a man his age, as he wedged the thermite grenades into the gap between the turret and the chassis. Then she watched as the grenades detonated, as the tank's ammunition cooked off in a spectacular explosion, as El Demonio, the terror of the Cuban armored corps, was reduced to a burning hulk of twisted metal. Holloway rolled away from the explosion, singed but alive, his gravelly laughter carrying across the compound like a battle cry. "Sombra, get down here. We're moving out." Elena descended from her perch, her body suddenly aware of the exhaustion that combat adrenaline had been masking. Every muscle ached, every joint protested, but she was alive, and they had won at least for now. The surviving Rangers gathered at the compound's southern exit, preparing to move toward the new extraction point that Command had designated via brief radio contact. The wounded were stabilized, but needed real medical care soon. The ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the sun would be rising in less than 3 hours, eliminating the darkness that had been their greatest ally. "Outstanding work, Vasquez." Holloway fell into step beside her as they moved out. "You saved a lot of lives tonight." "I also took a lot of lives," Elena replied, her voice flat. "That's the job. The fact that it bothers you means you're still human." They walked in silence for several minutes, the jungle gradually giving way to more open terrain as they approached the coast. The sound of gunfire had faded, replaced by the distant crash of waves and the occasional call of nocturnal birds. Then Elena saw her grandmother again. The old woman stood at the crest of a small hill, her white dress billowing in a breeze that didn't seem to affect the surrounding vegetation. She was looking at something beyond the hill, her expression troubled in a way that Elena had never seen during her grandmother's life. "Sir," Elena said, stopping abruptly. "I need a minute." Holloway followed her gaze, saw nothing, and nodded. "Make it quick. We need to keep moving." Elena approached the hill alone, her rifle lowered but ready. As she climbed, she felt the familiar sensation of passing between worlds, the same sensation she had felt with stepping through the door in the jungle. At the top of the hill, she understood why her grandmother looked troubled. Below, in a small valley that should have been empty, a Cuban forward operating base sprawled across the landscape. Tents, vehicles, soldiers, artillery pieces. And in the center of the base, a group of American prisoners, medical students. Judging by their civilian clothing, were being loaded into transport trucks. "They're taking them," Elena whispered. "They're evacuating the prisoners before we can rescue them." Her grandmother nodded slowly, then pointed at a specific truck, the one holding a young woman with blonde hair and terrified eyes. "That one," Elena said, understanding flowing into her like water into a vessel. "That's the priority. That's who we need to save." Her grandmother began to fade, but not before reaching out to touch Elena's cheek, a gesture of affection that Elena could swear she felt, despite knowing it was impossible. "Ti amo, Mija," the old woman said, her voice carrying across whatever gulf separated the living from the dead. "Make me proud." Then she was gone, and Elena was alone on the hill, staring at an enemy base that contained her mission's true objective. She turned and moved back toward Holloway, her exhaustion forgotten, her purpose renewed. We will either find a way or make one. Hannibal Barca, the rescue of the American prisoners from the Cuban forward operating base, was not part of the original mission parameters. It was not sanctioned by command. It was not supported by any of the logistical planning that made military operations possible. It was, in Captain Holloway's professional opinion, absolute insanity. And yet, as Elena explained what she had seen, he found himself unable to refuse. You're telling me your dead grandmother showed you an enemy base that our intelligence completely missed, and she specifically identified one prisoner who needs to be rescued above all others? Yes, sir. And you expect me to divert our entire for 6 Rangers, to wounded, and 1 sniper who's been seeing ghosts all night to assault a fortified position with unknown enemy strength? Yes, sir. Holloway stared at her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he did something Elena didn't expect. He laughed. Vasquez, you're either the bravest soldier I've ever met, or the craziest. Either way, I'm in. He turned to Lieutenant Parker. Lieutenant, change of plans. We're going to rescue some prisoners. Parker's expression cycled through several. Emotions: disbelief, concern, resignation, and finally determination. What do you need us to do, Captain? They planned the assault in whispered conferences, sketching diagrams in the dirt, calculating angles of approach and fields of fire. Elena provided detailed intelligence on the base's layout, information that seemed to flow into her mind from a source she couldn't identify, perhaps Consejero, perhaps her grandmother, perhaps the accumulated intuition of a sniper who had learned to see what others missed. The attack would be a surgical strike, Elena providing overwatch from an elevated position to the east, while Holloway and 3 Rangers infiltrated from the west. Parker and the remaining Rangers would create a diversion to the south, drawing attention away from the main assault. It was a desperate plan, relying on speed, surprise, and an amount of luck that bordered on the miraculous. But desperate times called for desperate measures. We move in 15 minutes, Holloway announced. Check your gear, check your weapons, and say whatever prayers you need to say. This is going to be a rough one. Elena found a quiet spot at the edge of the group and began the ritual preparation of a sniper about to enter combat. She cleaned her rifle, counted her remaining ammunition 8 rounds, and checked the photograph of her grandmother that she still carried in her vest pocket. The face in the photograph smiled back at her, frozen in a moment of happiness that seemed impossibly distant from the violence of this night. I don't know if you can hear me, Elena whispered. I don't know if any of this is real, or if I've finally lost my mind. But if you're really here, if you're really helping me, thank you. And please, help me save these people. A hand touched her shoulder, and Elena turned to find Holloway standing behind her. Talking to your grandmother? Is it that obvious? Let's just say I've had my own conversations with people who aren't there anymore. He held up the Karenni around his neck, the one with the 3 wedding rings. My first wife, Margaret. She died 6 months after our divorce car accident. I never got to tell her I was sorry for the way things ended. So I keep her ring, and sometimes I talk to it. Does that make me crazy? I don't know. Sir, does it? Holloway considered the question. I think it makes me human, and I think that's the one thing we can't afford to lose, no matter how many enemies we kill or how much blood we spill. He squeezed her shoulder. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, trust it. Your instincts have gotten us this far, and if my instincts are wrong, then we'll die together, and I'll haunt you in the afterlife until you apologize. Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling. Fair enough, sir. All right, let's move. We've got prisoners to rescue and a war to win. It is fatal to enter any war without the will to win it. Douglas MacArthur, the assault on the Cuban forward operating base began at 0:01 hours. In the gray twilight that preceded dawn, Elena had positioned herself on a rocky outcropping, approximately 400 meters from the base's eastern perimeter. The elevation gave her a commanding view of the entire compound, including the transport trucks where the American prisoners waited, with the desperate hope of the condemned. Through her scope, she could see the young blonde woman her grandmother had identified, now awake, now aware that something was happening, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for salvation. All units, this is Overwatch. I'm in position. Southern Diversion Team, you are clear to begin. Parker's voice crackled in response. Copy that. Initiating diversion now. The explosion that followed was small by military standards. A single grenade detonated near the base's fuel depot, but its psychological impact was enormous. Cuban soldiers scrambled for their weapons, officers shouted contradictory orders, and the well-organized base descended into momentary chaos. Western Assault Team, you have a window, Elena reported. Suggest rapid approach via the motor pool. Roger that, Holloway responded. Moving now. Elena tracked her scope across the base, searching for threats to the assault team. She found a Cuban soldier manning a heavy machine gun emplacement that overlooked the motor. Pouland eliminated him with a single shot. 7 rounds remaining. The assault team moved like ghosts through the chaos, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the pre-dawn gray. Elena watched them reach the first transport truck, watched Holloway gesture to his rangers, watched them begin extracting prisoners with brutal efficiency. Then everything went wrong. A Cuban officer Elena hadn't seen before, emerging from a tent near the base's center, began organizing a counterattack. Within seconds, a squad of soldiers was moving toward the transport trucks, their weapons raised. Western Team, you have 10 hostiles approaching from the northeast. Recommend immediate extraction. Copy that. Where? Holloway's voice cut off in a burst of static. Elena saw why through her scope. A Cuban soldier had spotted the assault team and opened fire, his rifle chattering on full automatic. 2 Rangers went down. Holloway dove for cover behind a truck, returning fire with his sidearm. The blonde woman was still in her truck, still waiting, still hoping. Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She abandoned her Overwatch position and began moving toward the base. Overwatch, what are you doing? Parker's voice was sharp with concern. You're supposed to. I'm supposed to complete the mission, Elena interrupted. Keep that diversion going. I'm going in. The next 5 minutes were a blur of violence and instinct. Elena moved through the base like a wraith, using her remaining ammunition with the precision of a surgeon. Each shot counted. Each kill opened a path forward. She found Holloway pinned behind the transport truck, bleeding from a wound in his arm, but still fighting. She found 2 of the Rangers dead and 1 wounded. She found the Cuban officer organizing the counterattack and eliminated him with her 5th to last round. And she found the blonde woman, crouched in the back of the truck, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. Come with me, Elena said, extending her hand. I'm getting you out of here. The woman, who would later introduce herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a second-year medical student from Kansas, took Elena's hand without hesitation. They moved through the chaos together, Elena clearing the path with her rifle, Sarah staying close behind, Holloway limping along with the wounded Rangers supported between them. The diversion was still ongoing, the remaining Cuban forces confused and scattered, the extraction route miraculously clear. They reached the base's perimeter just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. They had done the impossible. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. Richard Marcinko, the extraction point, was a small beach on Grenada's western coast, where a Navy helicopter waited with rotors spinning. The pilot, a young Warren officer named Thompson, watched with obvious relief as the ragged group emerged from the jungle. Captain Holloway, we've been waiting for you. Command said you went dark 2 hours ago. Long story, Holloway replied, helping the wounded Ranger into the helicopter. Let's just say we took the scenic route. The helicopter lifted off as the first rays of full daylight spread across the island. From the air, Elena could see the scope of Operation Urgent Fury, American forces advancing on all fronts, Cuban positions crumbling under the assault, the strategic objectives falling one by one. They had won, or at least, they were winning. But Elena felt no triumph. She felt only exhaustion and grief and a particular emptiness that comes after prolonged exposure to violence. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her, still trembling, still processing the trauma of her captivity and rescue. How did you know where to find us? She asked. How did you know about that base? Elena considered various answers, all of them true, none of them complete. I had help, she finally said. From someone who's been looking out for me. A guardian angel? Something like that. The helicopter banked toward the American fleet anchored offshore, toward medical facilities and debriefings and the slow process of returning to normal life. Elena watched the island recede beneath them and felt a strange sense of loss. She hadn't seen her grandmother since the rescue, hadn't seen Consejero since before the assault. Were they gone now? Had they served their purpose and moved on to whatever existence awaited the dead? Or were they still there, invisible, watching over her with the patience of eternity. Elena didn't know, and she suspected she never would. Vasquez. Holloway's voice cut through her reverie. Outstanding work tonight. I'm putting you in for a commendation. Thank you, sir. But I was just doing my job. That's exactly what makes it outstanding. He leaned back against the helicopter's bulkhead, his wounded arm cradled against his chest. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another hotshot sniper with something to prove. I was wrong. What do you think now? Holloway considered the question for a long moment. I think you're the kind of soldier who sees things others can't, and I think that's going to take you places, some of them good, some of them not so good. Just remember, the ghosts you carry with you can be allies or enemies. The choice is yours. Elena nodded slowly, understanding more than Holloway probably realized. I remember, sir. The helicopter continued toward the fleet, carrying its cargo of survivors toward an uncertain future. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Albert Einstein frequently quoted in military leadership contexts. The debriefing took place aboard the USS Guam, in a cramped conference room that smelled of diesel fuel and coffee. Major Harrison, the same officer who had briefed them before the mission, listened to Holloway's report with an expression that cycled between disbelief and grudging admiration. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Harrison said when Holloway finished. You deviated from your assigned extraction route, discovered an enemy base that our intelligence had completely missed, and conducted an unauthorized rescue operation that recovered 7 American prisoners, including 3 medical students we didn't even know had been captured? That's correct, sir. And Staff Sergeant Vasquez played a key role in all of this? She was essential, sir. Without her reconnaissance and marksmanship, we wouldn't have survived the night. Harrison turned his attention to Elena, who sat at rigid attention in her chair. Staff Sergeant, Captain Holloway's report mentions several incidents that are unusual. He describes you navigating through enemy territory using routes that shouldn't have been passable, providing intelligence that you couldn't have obtained through conventional means, and taking shots that were, according to his assessment, beyond normal human capability. Elena felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, the pressure to explain things that defied explanation. Sir, the stress of combat can. I'm not asking for an explanation, Staff Sergeant. I'm telling you that whatever happened on that island, the results speak for themselves. You and Captain Holloway accomplished more in one night than some entire units accomplish in a campaign. Harrison leaned back in his chair. I'm recommending both of you for commendations, and I'm noting in the official record that your methods, while unconventional, were effective. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. The Cubans are filing protests about the rescue operation. They're claiming we violated some kind of agreement about prisoner treatment. It's going to be a diplomatic mess. Harrison paused, his expression softening slightly. But the prisoners are safe. The medical students are going home, and that's what matters. The debriefing continued for another hour, covering tactical details, ammunition expenditure, and the various bureaucratic requirements of military operations. When it finally ended, Elena walked out onto the Guam's deck and breathed deeply of the salt air. The sun was setting over the Caribbean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The war was essentially over. Grenada would be secured within days. The Cuban military presence eliminated, the American objectives achieved. But for Elena, something was just beginning. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out the photograph of her grandmother. The face in the picture seemed to smile more broadly than before, as if Ana Maria Vasquez was proud of what her granddaughter had accomplished. I did it, Abuela, Elena whispered. I made it through. A breeze stirred the air around her, warm, gentle, carrying the scent of tropical flowers that shouldn't have been detectable this far from shore. Elena chose to believe it was her grandmother's response. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The night after the debriefing, Elena found herself unable to sleep. She lay in her rack aboard the Guam, listening to the ship's machinery and the distant sound of waves, her mind replaying the events of the past 48 hours in an endless loop. The faces of the men she had killed haunted her not as accusers, but as reminders of the weight her actions carried. Each one had been someone's son, someone's friend, someone's hope for the future. And she had ended them with the squeeze of a trigger, the flight of a bullet, the mathematics of death. Eventually, she gave up on sleep and made her way to the ship's mess hall, hoping that coffee and solitude might quiet her thoughts. Instead, she found Sarah Mitchell sitting alone at a table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. Couldn't sleep either? Elena asked. Sarah shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that truck, waiting to be taken somewhere I'd never return from. She looked up at Elena with eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of trauma. How do you do it? How do you keep going after everything you've seen? Elena considered the question carefully. In the special operations community, such conversations were rarely held. The culture discouraged emotional vulnerability, encouraged the compartmentalization of trauma. But Sarah wasn't military. Sarah was a medical student who had come to Grenada to help people and had instead become a prisoner of war. I have help, Elena said finally, taking a seat across from Sarah. Not the kind I can explain easily, but I carry people with me. My grandmother, a soldier who appears when I need guidance. They remind me why I fight, and they help me bear the weight of what I've done. Like guardian angels, something like that. Or maybe just memories that refuse to stay buried. I don't know which, honestly. What I know is that they've saved my life more times than I can count, and they've helped me save others. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing this. My grandmother used to tell me about spirits protectors who watch over the living from the other side. I always thought it was superstition. But after everything I've experienced, she trailed off, her gaze distant. Maybe there's more to this world than we understand, Elena offered. Maybe the line between the living and the dead isn't as solid as we think. Or maybe trauma does strange things to the human mind, and we see what we need to see to survive. Does it matter which is true? Sarah considered this for a long moment, then smiled, a fragile expression, but genuine. I suppose not. What matters is that we're here, and we're alive, and we have the chance to do something meaningful with whatever time we have left. That sounds like something a doctor would say. I'm not a doctor yet, but I will be when I get back home. Sarah's smile strengthened. And I'm going to dedicate my career to helping people who've been through trauma like this. Military personnel, civilians, whoever needs help processing the things they've experienced. That's a good goal. It's the only way I know to make sense of what happened, to turn something terrible into something that matters. Elena thought about her own path, the years of training, the missions completed, the lives taken and saved. She had never considered what came after, what legacy she might leave beyond the classified reports and the medals she would probably receive. Maybe it was time to start thinking about that. Tell me more about your plans, she said to Sarah. I want to understand. They talked until dawn. To women from different worlds united by shared trauma and the unlikely circumstances of their meeting. And when the sun rose over the Caribbean, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope for a future that extended beyond the next mission. Only the dead have seen the end of war. Plato commonly attributed 3 days after the rescue. Elena received orders to return to the United States for a period of leave and psychological evaluation. The evaluation was standard procedure for soldiers who had experienced extended combat, but Elena suspected that someone in the chain of command had read Holloway's unusual report and decided that a closer look was warranted. She didn't mind. After everything she had been through, a few weeks of rest sounded almost appealing. Holloway caught up with her as she was packing her kit for the transport flight. His arm was in a sling now, the wound healing but still painful, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who knew his body's limits. Heading home, Vasquez? Yes, sir. Orders came through this morning. Good. You've earned some downtime. He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. I wanted to thank you. Not officially, that's already been documented. I wanted to thank you personally. You saved my life out there. More than once. You saved mine too, sir. That's what soldiers do. But what you did see in things I couldn't see, trusting instincts that defy logic, that's something special. Something I haven't encountered in 23 years of service. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his Zippo lighter, the one with the inscription. I want you to have this. Elena stared at the lighter, then at Holloway. Sir, I can't. It's not a request. Staff Sergeant. Consider it a reminder that humor and humanity are worth preserving, even in the darkest moments. He pressed the lighter into her hand. And if you ever need someone to talk to about the things you see, someone who won't think you're crazy, you know where to find me. Elena looked down at the Zippo, reading the inscription, Se voca esteleno isso, you moriso rindo. Despite herself, she felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep fighting the good fight. Say you'll trust those ghosts of yours to guide you right. And say you'll stay human, no matter how much blood you spill. I will, sir, I promise. Holloway nodded, then did something unexpected. He pulled Elena into a brief, awkward hug, the kind of gesture that violated every protocol in the military handbook, but felt absolutely right in the moment. Take care of yourself, Sombra, and take care of those spirits watching over you. They've earned it. Then he was gone, limping back toward the ship's interior, and Elena was left alone with her kit, her memories, and a Zippo lighter that carried more weight than any metal ever could. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill, the transport flight back to the United States took 11 hours, with stops in Puerto Rico and Florida. Elena spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching the ocean pass beneath her and thinking about everything that had happened. She had gone to Grenada as a rookie sniper, with something to prove. She had returned as something different, something she didn't yet have words for, but which felt significant in ways that transcended military achievement. The ghosts had helped her, yes, but they had also shown her something about herself, a capacity for faith, for trust, for connection that she had believed war had destroyed. Her grandmother had appeared to her at the moment of greatest need. Consejero had guided her through impossible passages, and together they had helped her save lives that would have been lost without their intervention. Were they real? Were they products of a stressed and exhausted mind? Elena didn't know, and she suspected she never would. What she knew was that they had changed her, that the Elena Vasquez, who had boarded a transport plane for Grenada, was not the same Elena Vasquez, who was now flying home. And maybe that was enough. As the plane began its final descent into Andrews Air Force Base, Elena felt a familiar presence settle beside her. She didn't turn to look, didn't need to. You did well, Mija. Her grandmother's voice was soft, warm, carrying the accent of Cuba that had never faded despite decades in America. Your father would be proud of you. Is he? Is he where you are? A long pause. He is at peace. He wants you to know that. He never stopped loving you, and he never blamed anyone for what happened. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Will I see you again? Whenever you need me. Whenever the darkness becomes too heavy to bear alone. I will be there, watching over you, guiding you home. The presence faded as the plane touched down, but the warmth of her grandmother's words remained. Elena Vasquez, sniper, soldier, granddaughter, was home. But she understood now that home was not a place. It was a state of being, a connection to those who loved her, a bond that transcended the boundaries between life and death. And she would carry that understanding with her through whatever battles lay ahead. A soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. Napoleon Bonaparte, the psychological evaluation, as it turned out, was less threatening than Elena had anticipated. The army psychiatrist, a tired-looking colonel named Dr. Reynolds, listened to her account of the mission with the patient attention of someone who had heard stranger things. You're describing what we call combat-induced perceptual alterations, he said when she finished. It's not uncommon for soldiers under extreme stress to experience visual and auditory phenomena that don't align with consensus reality. The brain does remarkable things to protect us from trauma. So you think I was hallucinating? I think your brain found a way to process information that might have otherwise overwhelmed you. Whether that information came from external sources or internal ones is, frankly, less important than the fact that you survived and accomplished your mission. He made a note in his file. I'm going to recommend that you receive regular counseling sessions for the next 6 months, standard protocol for combat veterans. But I don't see any indication of pathology that would affect your fitness for duty. Elena nodded, not entirely satisfied, but recognizing that this was probably the best outcome she could hope for. Thank you, Drive. Reynolds. Thank me by taking care of yourself, Staff Sergeant. What you've been through leaves marks that aren't visible on any medical scan. Give yourself permission to heal. The counseling sessions began the following week, led by a civilian therapist named Dr. Patricia Herrera, who specialized in military trauma. Unlike Dr. Reynolds, she didn't try to explain away Elena's experiences with clinical terminology. Tell me about your grandmother, she said during their first session. Not about what you saw in Grenada. Tell me about who she was when she was alive. Elena found herself talking for over an hour about Ana Maria's childhood in Cuba, about her escape during the chaos of the revolution, about the apartment in Little Havana where she had raised Elena after her father's disappearance, about the stories she told, and the food she cooked, and the prayers she whispered every night for those she had lost. She sounds like an extraordinary woman, Doctor, Herrera said when Elena finished. And it sounds like you carry her with you not just as a memory, but as a living presence in your heart. Is that what you think I was experiencing in Granada? A manifestation of her presence in my heart? I think that's one possibility. I also think there are things in this world that defy easy explanation. And that's sometimes the most healing thing we can do is accept them, without trying to categorize them. Drive. Herrera smiled. What matters is that you're here, you're processing your experience, and you're allowing yourself to grieve and grow. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Winston Churchill. 6 months after Grenada, Elena received orders for a new assignment, instructor duty at the Army's sniper school, where she would help train the next generation of precision marksmen. It was, in military terms, a prestigious posting of recognition of her skills and experience. But for Elena, it represented something more, an opportunity to pass on what she had learned, not just about shooting, but about the intangible qualities that separated survivors from statistics. She arrived at Fort Benning on a crisp autumn morning, the Georgia air carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of rifle fire. The training facilities stretched across acres of woodland and open terrain, a landscape designed to test every aspect of a sniper's capabilities. Her first class consisted of 12 candidates, 11 men and 1 woman, all of them eager, nervous, and completely unprepared for what she was about to teach them. "Welcome to sniper training," Elena said, standing before them in the classroom where they would spend the next several weeks. "My name is Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, and I'm going to teach you how to kill people from very far away." The candidate shifted uncomfortably, exactly as she had intended. "But that's not the most important thing I'm going to teach you. The most important thing is this: every person you kill through that scope was someone's child, someone's friend, someone's hope for the future. If you can't carry that weight, if you can't acknowledge the humanity of your targets, then you have no business behind a rifle." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Questions? One of the candidates, a young sergeant with the intense eyes of someone who had seen combat, raised his hand. "Staff Sergeant, what if the weight becomes too heavy? What if you can't carry it anymore?" Elena considered the question carefully. She thought of her grandmother, of Consejero, of the moments in Granada when she had been guided by presences she couldn't explain. "Then you find help," she said finally, "from your teammates, from your family, from whatever sources of strength you can access. No soldier survives alone, and no sniper carries the burden of their kills without support." She paused. "And sometimes, the help comes from places you don't expect." The training proceeded over the following weeks, and Elena found herself drawing on lessons she hadn't realized she had learned. She taught her students about ballistics and trajectory, about wind reading and range estimation, but she also taught them about patience, about focus, about the mental discipline required to make life and death decisions in fractions of a second. And occasionally, in quiet moments when the training day ended and the candidates had returned to their barracks, Elena would sit on the rifle range and talk to the empty air. "I'm trying, Abuela," she would say. "I'm trying to pass on what you taught me about love, about family, about carrying those we've lost." The air never answered in words, but sometimes a warm breeze would stir despite the stillness of the evening, and Elena would smile. Brave men rejoice in adversity, just as brave soldiers triumph in war. Lucius Annaeus Seneca. 2 years after Grenada, Elena was deployed again, this time to a classified operation in Central America that the military would never officially acknowledge. The mission was dangerous, complex, and required exactly the kind of skills she had developed in training and combat. She went willingly, knowing that this was what she had been built for. The details of the operation would remain classified for decades, but Elena would later tell Dr. Herrera that it was during this mission that she truly understood the gift her grandmother had given her. "I was in a situation where conventional tactics wouldn't work," she explained. "The enemy had anticipated everything we might try. But then I saw her abuela standing at the edge of the compound, pointing toward a way out that none of us had considered. And you followed her guidance." "I did. And we made it out alive, all of us." "Do you still see her? Your grandmother?" Elena considered the question. "Less frequently than I used to. Maybe because I've learned to trust my own instincts more. Or maybe because she knows I don't need her as much as I did." She paused. "But she's still there. I can feel her. And whenever I'm in real trouble, she appears." "That sounds like a gift." "It is. It's the greatest gift she could have, given me the knowledge that I'm never truly alone." The years that followed brought more missions, more challenges, more moments of crisis and triumph. Elena rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a master sergeant. With a reputation for unconventional thinking and supernatural luck, her fellow soldiers joked that she had made a deal with something beyond the grave, and Elena never corrected them. Maybe she had. Maybe the deal was simply love, the love of a grandmother who refused to let death separate her from her granddaughter, the love of a father who had disappeared but never stopped watching over his child. And through it all, Elena carried the lessons of Granada with her, that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think, that the ghosts we carry can be allies or enemies, depending on how we choose to embrace them, and that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen inside our own hearts. The only easy day was yesterday. Navy SEAL's motto, the story of Elena Vasquez, does not end with a neat conclusion, a final victory, a closing of the chapter. War stories rarely do. The soldiers who survive carry their experiences forward into new battles and new challenges, into the quiet moments of civilian life and the tumultuous demands of continued service. What can be said is this: Elena served with distinction for 18 years, completing operations on 5 continents and training hundreds of soldiers who would go on to serve with their own distinction. She received medals and commendations, but she valued most the letters from the people she had saved: the medical students from Granada, the hostages from later missions, the fellow soldiers who credited her with their survival. She maintained contact with Captain Holloway until his death from cancer in 1997, visiting him in the hospital and holding his hand as he took his final breath. True to his word, he died smiling, making one last joke about the quality of hospital food and the attractiveness of the nurses. She stayed in touch with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who became a leading expert in military trauma and credited Elena's rescue as the pivotal moment that set her life's direction. And she never stopped seeing her grandmother, not as frequently as during that desperate night in Granada, but enough to know that Ana Maria Vasquez remained present, remained watching, remained proud of everything her granddaughter had become. War is not about who is right, Elena would tell her students in the years that followed. It is about who is left. But being left carries responsibilities to those who didn't survive, to those who will come after us, to the future we're building with every decision we make. It was a lesson she had learned from her grandmother, from Consejero, from the mysterious door in the jungle that had led her through the impossible. And it was a lesson she would carry forever. The soldier above all others prays for peace, for it is the soldier who must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and scars of war. Douglas MacArthur. But where is Elena now? The question echoes across the decades, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Some records indicate that Master Sergeant Elena Sombra Vasquez retired from military service in 2001, returning to Miami to care for her aging mother and reconnect with the Cuban-American community that had raised her. Other records, classified, incomplete, contradictory, suggest something different, that Elena was recruited for a specialized unit operating beyond the boundaries of conventional military structure, that she continues to serve in capacities that will never be acknowledged, that her gift for seeing what others cannot has been put to uses that defy imagination. What is known is this: in 2003, during a particularly violent operation in the Middle East, an American Special Forces team found themselves surrounded by enemy combatants, with no hope of rescue. According to their after-action reports, heavily redacted, but partially recovered through Freedom of Information requests, they were guided to safety by a female sniper who appeared from nowhere, eliminated 17 enemy fighters with 17 shots, and disappeared before anyone could identify her. The soldiers described her as Hispanic, mid-30s, with black hair and brown eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless battles. They said she was accompanied by a ghostly presence, an old woman in white, who pointed the way through the darkness. They said she saved their lives and asked for nothing in return. And when they tried to thank her, she simply smiled and said, "Someone did the same for me once. Pass it on." Then she was gone, vanishing into the night like a shadow dispersing at dawn. Was it Elena? Was it someone else who had inherited her gift, her mission, her purpose? The answers remain hidden, buried in classified files and the memories of soldiers who have learned not to speak of things they cannot explain. But somewhere, perhaps, a sniper still watches over those who fight in darkness. Somewhere, a grandmother's love still guides the lost toward safety. And somewhere, the line between the living and the dead remains thin enough for miracles to pass through. The battle is won by those who firmly resolve to win it. Leo Tolstoy. As for the final night in Grenada, the night that changed everything, one detail was never included in any official report. After the rescue, after the extraction, after the long flight back to the fleet, Elena discovered that her rifle had jammed. Not during the rescue, not during the assault on the Cuban base, but at some point during the chaos. The M21 she called Esperanza had suffered a catastrophic failure that should have rendered it completely inoperable. The armorer who examined it couldn't explain how she had fired even a single round, much less the dozens of precision shots that had saved so many lives. This rifle hasn't worked in days, he told her, shaking his head. Look, the firing pin is cracked, the chamber is fouled, the barrel is compromised. By every mechanical standard, this weapon should have failed the moment you pulled the trigger. Elena looked at the rifle, her rifle, the weapon she had named for hope, and understood something that defied rational explanation. Her grandmother had not just shown her the way. Her grandmother had given her the means to walk it. Sometimes, Elena would later tell Dr. Herrera, hope is stronger than physics. Sometimes love is more powerful than mechanics. And sometimes, the impossible becomes possible because we refuse to accept any other outcome. She never used that rifle again. Instead, she had it decommissioned and kept it as a reminder of what she had accomplished, of what she had been given, of the grandmother who had loved her enough to transcend death itself. And somewhere in a storage unit in Miami, that rifle still waits, a testament to the night when a rookie sniper and a laughing captain fought their way through impossible odds, guided by ghosts and protected by love. The story continues. The war goes on, and Elena Vasquez, wherever she is, whatever she has become, remains a legend whispered among those who have seen the darkness and survived. Sombra, they call her Shadow, but shadows need light to exist, and her light has never faded.